Hello and welcome. This is August 18th, 2017, and you're watching the Friday webcast here at LaRouchePack.com. I'm Jason Ross, and I'll be the host today. I am joined in the studio today by Will Wirtz from Executive Intelligence Review, and joined remotely from the Manhattan area by Diane Sayre, a member of the LaRouchePack Policy Committee. So, to set the stage for today's discussion, which is going to get into a new flank on the attempted coup being run against President Trump, I'd like to start with a piece of very positive news coming from China. We can see here the cover of a story that was published in China Daily called Identifying with China. And it's a story about Helga Tsepp-LaRouche and her work with her husband Lyndon LaRouche over many decades for development and for better understanding and cooperation with China. The article starts with Helga's 1971 trip to China during the time of the Cultural Revolution, when she was a passenger on a Swedish cargo ship. She saw nations in Africa, she saw China, and she came back from the trip with a feeling that, quote, I came back from this trip with the absolute conviction that the world had to change, that it had to be improved. In the article, China Daily contrasts the potential for cooperation between China and the United States between the Obama administration and the Trump administration. The article says, after quoting Helga saying that the Chinese economic miracle is really the most successful model, that unlike the Obama administration, which was more resistant to Chinese initiatives of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Belt and Road Initiative, U.S. President Donald Trump has put infrastructure construction atop his agenda and sent an interagency delegation, led by Matthew Pottinger, a National Security Council senior advisor, to the Beijing Forum, referring to the May Forum on the Belt and Road Initiative that Helga Tsepp-LaRouche also attended. I think that the article really goes to show the importance that China puts on Helga's role, and it closes with a quote from her. She says, "We are very happy. It's one thing for a small organization like ours to produce ideas, but it's a quite different thing that the largest country in the world started to do it," she said, referring to China's adoption of the Belt and Road Initiative in the wake of years of organizing by the Schiller Institute for the new Silk Road, for the World Land Bridge. And she ends with her hopes that Lyndon LaRouche may be able to visit China and that he certainly has a great love for the country. So the real potential that exists for a new paradigm in the world, for the U.S. joining the incredible success of China, of getting out of financial speculation of Wall Street, of London, and moving towards Franklin Roosevelt-style development, it's immense. And it's because of that potential that there is a massive effort underway to unseat President Trump. Now, we've been very active on this through, for example, our publicity around the memorandum by the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, who have produced now 50 memoranda about U.S. policy, and their most recent one about the Russian supposed hack of the DNC, indicating that the whole Russiagate story is a fraud. This has really gained a tremendous amount of traction. It's been picked up by Salon, by Bloomberg, by The Nation very significantly in a very large article. And this has brought out attacks in the recent week, coming from The Hill, for example, as we see here, who put out an article why the latest theory about the DNC not being hacked is probably wrong. We then saw an attack come out from the Washington Post, which said that they don't believe that The Nation, the magazine that published a story on the VIPS memorandum, that The Nation is reviewing their story, casting doubt on Russian hacking of the DNC. The Washington Post says that they really hope The Nation gets on the right side of this story. Now, there's been a response that came out from two media outlets. One of them, Disobedient Media, is the publication that first put out the results from the Forensicator, who had analyzed metadata that came from files released by the Guccifer 2.0 persona, and also from Adam Carter, who maintains a website that goes through the Guccifer 2.0 persona. I just want to review a few highlights of what these articles have to say, because I think it's very important. The VIPS memorandum is correct. A deliberate attempt was put in place to create false Russian footprints, false Russian evidence, to make it appear that the DNC leaks were actually a Russian hack. The fact of the matter is that no actual evidence has ever been presented showing that Russian actors hacked the DNC and provided the material that WikiLeaks later published that caused such a commotion that it forced the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other top officials in the Democratic National Committee. The attacks on the VIP's memo focus on something about data transfer speeds, which were used to show that the files that Guccifer 2.0 released had been copied to a flash drive rather than being hacked over the internet. That's pretty much the only thing that these articles have to complain about. They say that the speed of transfer could have been possible over the internet. I'll just review very few aspects of this, which is that the information that was processed, the analysis that came from the forensicator and from Adam Carter, showed not only that the speed was too high for many internet connections, but that it very specifically matched the typical transfer speed of a USB 2.0 flash drive. They also showed that file manipulation occurred on the East Coast time zone. They showed that the files showed evidence of being used in a FAT file system, FAT file system, which is only used on flash drives, at least in the past decades. And, of course, the fact that there is absolute proof that the Russian fingerprints that were found and discovered in the documents released by Guccifer 2.0 were put there deliberately so that they could be found. And those aspects simply are not even touched by the legacy media's attack on the VIP's revelations. So this whole Russiagate thing, it is falling apart. The attempts by the Washington Post, New Yorker magazine to cover things up are really a dismal failure if you read the articles. And that brings us to the topic that we're going to be hearing from in depth from Will Wirtz, which is the latest flank in the attempt to unseat President Trump, namely the events and the reactions to those events in Charlottesville. So, Will, what can you tell us about this?
Well, first of all, what I want to point out is that what President Trump said in his first press conference following the Charlottesville event, that there is bigotry and violence on many sides, is in fact true. And I think that not only applies to the Charlottesville case per se, where you had Nazis on one side, you had Intifada on the other side, which is an anarchist violent organization. And it's most likely that you may have had provocateurs. It's hard to believe that the FBI was not involved in some way under the guise of monitoring the situation. But if you stand back and look at the overall climate in the country, it's also the case that there is violence and bigotry on many sides, and specifically directed at President Trump. And I want to review some of the highlights of that, which represent an unprecedented situation in terms of violent threats against the President of the United States. First of all, just as he was being inaugurated, the British publication The Spectator wrote, "Will Donald Trump be assassinated, ousted in a coup, or just impeached?" You had a number of statements from the would-be Hollywood royalty, including Madonna, who said, "I thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House." Then you had CNN correspondent, or former correspondent now, Kathy Griffin, who held a mock decapitated head of the President of the United States. You also had, over the summer, Shakespeare in the Park doing a performance of Julius Caesar, in which Julius Caesar was portrayed as Donald Trump and was viciously assassinated on the stage. You had another Hollywood actor, Johnny Depp, who joked, "When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? It has been a while, and maybe it's time." In July of this year, there was a book released by a Guardian reporter by the name of Jonathan Friedland. It's entitled to kill a president. And just within the last 48 hours, a Missouri state senator, Maria Chapela Nadal, wrote in her Facebook, "I hope Trump is assassinated." And we should not forget that on June 14 of this year in Alexandria, Republican Congressman Steve Scalise was shot while practicing with 20 to 25 other Republican congressmen for a congressional baseball game for charity. If the police present on the scene had not responded appropriately, you could have had a massacre of multiple Republican congressional congressmen or senators. So let's be honest about the threat of violence. This is virtually unprecedentedly directed at a president of the United States. And we have had presidents who have been assassinated, as people know. And so this is the actual reality of the situation. Now, what I want to do is to look at this situation in Charlottesville, which is merely the most recent escalation of an ongoing attempted coup against the President of the United States. And it's modeled upon what was done in Ukraine, the Maidan, or the various color revolutions which preceded the coup in Ukraine. On January 17, just before President Trump's inauguration, President Putin of Russia said, "I have an impression they practiced in Kiev, Ukraine, and are ready to organize a Maidan in Washington against President Trump." On February 21st, 2017, Executive Intelligence Review released a 17-page dossier, which was entitled Obama and Soros Color Revolutions, Nazis in Ukraine 2014, USA 2017. And if you look at the situation in Ukraine, you get a direct parallel to what is being orchestrated in the United States. In the dossier, what we disclose is that there were more than 2,000 non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in Ukraine funded by the US government, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and George Soros's Open Society. In fact, Victoria Nuland, the State Department representative for Ukraine, testified on December 13, 2014, as follows. "We have invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in building democratic skills and institutions." Now, the coup that was carried out in Ukraine was carried out by an organization called the Right Sector and various other organizations associated with it. And the Right Sector is an organization which traces its origin back to Stefan Bandera and his Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, or the OUN, which organization collaborated with Hitler during World War II and carried out mass exterminations of Poles and Jews. The Right Sector celebrates Bandera and actually carries out marches in Kiev and elsewhere in Ukraine celebrating him to this day. After World War II, Bandera, this Nazi war criminal, was recruited by Britain's MI6. And his top official, Mykola Lebed, who carried out the Ukrainian exterminations, went onto a CIA payroll as of 1948, thanks to CIA Deputy Director Alan Dulles. And the intention was to use the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, to carry out uprisings against the Soviet Union in the post-World War II period. And people will perhaps recall that Alan Dulles and James Angleton were very much involved in the Nazi rat lines after World War II helping Nazi criminals to escape, some to South America, others like Bandera and Lebed to London or to the United States. Now, Soros himself, who helped fund the Ukrainian coup, was 14 years old when the Nazis occupied Hungary. And he has publicly admitted that during that period, his father and he hid their Jewish background and worked with the Nazi occupation to confiscate the property of fellow Jews who had been sent to the concentration camps. And he actually views this experience very positively, with no regret whatsoever. Now, let's turn to Charlottesville with this in mind. Now, as I said, the events in Charlottesville last Saturday, I think, are very clearly a pre-staged event, with Nazis on the one side, Antifa or anti-fascist violent anarchists on the other side. Remember, in thinking about this, what happened in Ukraine. There were snipers who fired on demonstrators, and this was blamed on Yanukovych, the president of Ukraine, who says that he never gave any such orders. And it is believed that the snipers were actually organized by a third force or by the right sector itself, or a combination of the two, in order to carry out the coup by blaming the violence on Yanukovych. So that should be kept in mind. There's also a long-standing methodology of the British. This was formulated in a book called Gang Counter Gang by a British general by the name of Kitson, who used this methodology in Kenya as part of a counterinsurgency operation against the Mau Mau. Now, could you please show the, I think it's graphic number 11. If we look at Charlottesville, what stands out is that all of the key Democratic Party operatives involved in the Charlottesville event have direct connections to George Soros, to the Obama-Clinton State Department, and to John Podesta's Center for American Progress, which has become the center for the entire so-called resist movement against President Trump in the United States. Now, the Center for American Progress was founded in 2003 by John Podesta. At the time, George Soros promised to donate $3 million to its foundation. John Podesta, of course, was the campaign manager of Hillary Clinton and had previously been a senior counselor to President Obama. Now, the mayor of Charlottesville, a man by the name of Michael Signer, gave a speech on January 31st, 2017, in Charlottesville, in which he said, quote, "I am here today to declare that Charlottesville, the historic home of Thomas Jefferson, is a capital of the resistance." So this is January 31st. President Trump is only in office for 10 days, and approximately. And it's obviously several months before the events which occurred last Saturday. So this is what we're dealing with in the city of Charlottesville. It is the capital of the resistance to President Trump. Mayor Signer had previously been a senior policy advisor to John Podesta's Center for American Progress. In 2008, he worked with John Podesta on President-elect Barack Obama's State Department transition team. 2 years later, he traveled to Panjshir province, Afghanistan, as a member of a U.S. AID-sponsored mission to monitor Afghanistan's parliamentary elections. So what you have is a mayor of Charlottesville who works closely with John Podesta's Center for American Progress, which is the center of the resistance, which is obviously a Clinton-Obama operation, which is funded by George Soros. And he's also someone who has experience with respect to the State Department. Now, the individual who took the video of the car driven into the counter-protesters, which resulted in the death of Heather Heyer and the injury of many others, was an individual by the name of Brennan Gilmore. Gilmore is a former State Department employee. In 2011, Gilmore was Deputy Chief of Mission in the Central African Republic. In 2015, he was the top aide to Tom Perriello, a former congressman, who was appointed by Obama to be special envoy to the Great Lakes region and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 2016, Tom Perriello ran for the Democratic nomination for governor in the state of Virginia, a race which he eventually lost. Brennan Gilmore was his campaign chief of staff. In his campaign, Perriello received a total of $500,000 from George Soros personally. He also received $50,000 from George Soros' son, Gregory. Two other sons, not to be left out, of George Soros, Alexander and Jonathan, gave a total of $135,470 to Tom Perriello. So Perriello received a grand total of $685,470 from the Soros family in his campaign. Perriello also received $300,000 from Donald Sussman, a hedge fund manager who sits on the board of directors of Podesta's Center for American Progress. Tom Perriello, like Charlottesville Mayor Michael Signer, also worked directly for Podesta's Center for American Progress. In fact, from 2010 to 2014, Tom Perriello was the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Now, we know that Brennan Gilmore was present at the scene of the Charlottesville events because it was his video, which has circulated very widely. But Tom Perriello was also present. And he indicates that with an article which he wrote the day after, August 13, for the publication Slate. The article is entitled, "There is Only One Side to the Story of Charlottesville." And, of course, this is also the point made by Joe Biden, former vice president, who tweeted at the time, "There's only one side to Charlottesville," in opposition to what President Trump had said. Now, Perriello is a native of Charlottesville. And during his campaign for governor, he tried to position himself as the candidate of the anti-Trump resistance movement. So what you have here is, let me just add, there were three other organizations that were present as part of the counter demonstration, all of which were funded by George Soros. Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Standing Up for Racial Justice, and Refuse Fascism. But what you have here is in summary, is a U.S. State Department, George Soros-funded nest of operatives who have worked for John Podesta's Center for American Progress, which is the institutional center of the resist movement against President Trump. So this is the operation which went into action immediately after the events in Charlottesville to escalate the campaign against President Trump, which we now see spreading throughout the country. And I would point out that this, again, as I stressed at the beginning, these personnel, State Department, Soros, are the same personnel that were involved in the Maidan coup d'etat in Ukraine against President Yanukovych. And it should also be pointed out that the only way you can remove a president in Ukraine, according to the Constitution, is through impeachment. And he was never impeached. It was a violation of the Constitution of Ukraine. And what happened is an agreement was reached, which was signed onto by European countries as guarantors. And when it was presented to the Maidan, they rejected it and said that that they were going to storm the presidential residence if Yanukovych didn't reverse his position in respect to the EU association. And he fled the country for fear of his life. Now, we all know what happened to Allende in Chile. So is that unreasonable for him to have fled? And yet there was an unconstitutional coup, and it was backed by the United States, by Obama, by Hillary Clinton. And these are the people who backed Nazis who are attacking President Trump because he says there's violence on both sides, which there very clearly is. Now, after the incident in Charlottesville, President Obama tweeted a quote from Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. And according to Twitter, this is the most popular tweet that has ever been communicated on Twitter in its entire history. Now, I think that the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, gave a very good response to this. She quoted from Mandela as follows, quote, "No country can claim to be the policeman of the world, and no state can dictate to another what it should do. Those that yesterday were friends of our enemies have the gall today to tell me not to visit my brother Gaddafi. They are advising us to be ungrateful and forget our friend of the past." And then Zakharova addresses Obama directly. "Mr. Obama, a person was killed with your direct involvement, whom Nelson Mandela called his brother and thanked for help in gaining democracy, true democracy, not one invented in the Oval Office." She might also have pointed out, as implied by President Putin's statement, that it was Obama who installed Nazis in power in Ukraine and forced a duly elected president to flee the country for his life. So I think what we have here is a very clear case of a deliberate policy being carried out in the United States to overthrow or through a coup, through impeachment, or through assassination, as the Spectator said, a president of the United States. And this has to be stopped. We are circulating a petition on LPAC, which I would certainly encourage everyone to not only sign but to circulate to others. And it's at this moment in history, it's absolutely crucial that Americans stand up and insist that the president move on an investigation of the VIP's charges as critical to undermining the entire Maidan-style color revolution which is being attempted against the President of the United States at this moment. And that is crucial because, as the article in the China Daily indicates, Trump, as opposed to Obama, is someone who could potentially, and he's given indications that he would like to do this, could potentially work with China and Russia on the One Belt, One Road, Silk Road, and at the same time work with President Putin in a coordinated campaign to defeat terrorism. And we just had more terrorist attacks in Spain within the last 24, 48 hours. So this is not a fight which has been won, and yet it's absolutely crucial.
I think that's a very, very strong case you pulled together there, Will. I mean, this is, I think, very clear this is a coup. In terms of the response that this type of material is getting, although people in the media or the way that the legacy media report things, you'd think that everybody believes that Donald Trump was put in office by the Russians, and that's something that everybody thinks is a really important issue. That's not the response that we've been getting out when we talk to the population more generally. So I'd like to bring on Diane Sayer at this point and ask you, Diane, what can you tell us about the fertility and about the opportunity to organize people around this One Belt, One Road initiative and get past this Trump coup operation?
Well, what I can report is that the American population is not having any of this psycho Goebbels style propaganda against the president, and it is so over the top that it is impelling and propelling people who were not even Trump voters or Trump supporters to stop at our tables. And I will also say, as I told Mr. LaRouche yesterday, that it's very important to remember in this context that Lyndon LaRouche has a history in the United States as being the spokesman, the leader of something known as the American intellectual tradition. That is, there is no person alive today who has a greater understanding of the work of Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, the fight for our republic and its roots in the work of people like Nicholas of Cusa, Leibniz, and others, than Lyndon LaRouche. And as people know, LaRouche has been organizing this fight to get our republic to live up to the principles in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence for at least the last 50, 60 years, really his entire adult life, ever since he was in the military during World War II. So over these decades, LaRouche has been the founder and editor of Executive Intelligence Review magazine. We had various newspapers, published New Solidarity, the New Federalist. We have online news services, a Facebook page. He ran for president 8 times. And as a result, LaRouche has actually a very large following in the American population who remember his work, who remember his taking a principled stand on their behalf when others would not, and who paid the price for that by undergoing a criminal witch hunt run by exactly the same people down to the individual as like Robert Mueller, who are going after Trump today. So that combination, LaRouche's record, his authority, his voice, and the fact that the American people have suffered incredible hardship over these last 16 years, in particular of Bush and Obama, and the bailouts of Wall Street and the perpetual war policy since 9/11, the media simply does not carry the weight. So what we are getting in the New York metropolitan area, for example, yesterday, we had 3 teams out across the area in Westchester County, Long Island, and New Jersey. And combined, they signed up 32 new members in the LaRouche Political Action Committee, which also means a financial contribution, etc. They got probably 80, 90, 100 signatures on the petition that Will just mentioned. And the kind of things that are happening is that people are coming up, identifying themselves. In one case, the person came up and said, "I'm the chairman of the county Democratic Party. I don't want my party controlled by George Soros. I know this Russiagate crap is a lie." People are coming up, Republican Party members, and they are saying, we think the Republican Party should get rid of the elephant and instead have as its mascot the cowardly lion from The Wizard of Oz. Why won't they stand up and defend the president? People are really furious with both parties. They're furious with the Republican Party for not taking a stand. They're furious with the Democratic Party for taking a stand in the wrong direction. And they remember Lyndon LaRouche very, very well from, as I said, from these years of fighting. And I would just say, I think it's crucial, what Will mentioned earlier, and what Mrs. LaRouche has been insistent on, that if President Trump were to bring the United States into collaboration with the Belt and Road of China, which would require here the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, a national credit system, a national banking system to direct credit into fusion research, things that generate real growth, a real increase in productivity, as Mr. LaRouche outlined in his 4 laws, Trump would go down in history as one of the great leaders of all time. Now, so far, what we've seen is he has a very productive relationship with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. They met for 2 hours at the G20 meeting in Hamburg. You have a ceasefire in Syria as a result. ISIS is getting crushed. You have his relationship with Xi Jinping of China, which seems to be productive. It makes it possible to resolve the North Korea situation without resorting to war or military action of any kind. And that's the potential. On the other hand, what you have is the death of this transatlantic system, namely the British Empire, the City of London, the owners of George Soros, who may think that he owns the Queen because he handles her offshore accounts, but I would say it's the other way around, who are desperate. Because if the United States returns to its American system tradition, which is what Lyndon LaRouche embodies, then they lose. It's the end of the empire, and it's an era of a new paradigm for mankind where Americans can once again begin to have the dream that our children and our grandchildren will live longer, be better educated, be geniuses like Beethoven and Einstein, be free to produce from the potential of their God-given talents. That's what the founding fathers intended in our nation. That's the potential. And so what we're seeing in the streets, and this is across the country, and you have to think, I mean, this is New York. This is the greater New York metropolitan area. This is not the part of the country where President Trump won the election. We got a report yesterday from the West Coast in the San Francisco area. A couple set up in front of a post office, and while the postmaster wasn't that thrilled, and I guess had them move their table a little away from the door, they were there with the signs to defend President Trump and get a very positive response. Yesterday morning, we had organizers up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. For people who know what that means, that's a liberal Democratic area. They were getting out that Hamiltonian, Jason, that you were holding up earlier. The big headline, Russiagate is a fraud. And they said when they put up the giant sign that said defend President Trump, it got a little bit testier, but they reported really only 1 out of 15 people getting a look on their face like they just sucked on a lemon, and everyone else either was non-responsive or downright supportive. They got out 400 copies of the newspaper there in just 2 or 3 hours' time. So the truth of the matter is the media has lost its mandate. What is published in the New York Times, on CNN, the Washington Post, is simply no longer credible. People who took it upon themselves to watch President Trump's press conference with this pack of howling hyenas saw that he actually did a very competent job, and therefore the population is prepared for a fight. But I would say it's very, very urgent that everyone here take personal responsibility to not be a coward, to add your name to the petition, to speak about what is the coup that is going on against the president. There is an attempt by the British to depose through one means or another American president, and what would be put in place if such a thing were to occur would be catastrophic for the United States and mankind. So we cannot allow this to occur. I think the American people don't want it to occur. This is what we've been seeing. And the LaRouche Political Action Committee and Lyndon LaRouche personally are at the leadership of this fight.
I think that's right on. And why don't we take a look at we can take a look at some of the responses that we've been getting from Facebook and from Twitter from the use of this newspaper in particular, that Russiagate is a fraud. I think that here we go. Let's have a look. Here's some people on Facebook, and we got some pictures that were sent in to us from Twitter as well. If you're organizing around this, please tweet things out. Russia fraud, Russiagate fraud. Use those hashtags, Russia fraud. Make sure that people are able to find this material and make it very public, because this is a fight that absolutely has to be won to prevent a coup that will tie the hands of President Trump and prevent us from being able to have the kind of future that we could have of development and of growth and of cooperation with China. I guess we can see a few more here. So get out there, do this kind of activity, get people signing up, sign this petition, share it with everybody. So when you post your picture on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, make sure you're using the hashtag Russia fraud or Russiagate fraud or Russiagate, or all three of them, and include a link to the petition. You can contact us for your own personal link. You can also use the link that we have displayed on the screen several times during this show. That's lpac.co/YT17, lpac.co/YT17, to share that petition with others. Do outreach. Do it in this manner. Do it in other ways. We need to raise this call to President Trump to take this British apparatus on directly. Unless it's defeated, it's not just going to give up and go away. It has to be taken on explicitly and taken down. And that's the way that we can ensure the opportunity to have a different orientation for our country. So I think that'll do it for the show this week. Very grateful to have had Will Wirtz in the studio with us again for his very comprehensive look on that theme that Charlottesville was a directed operation, a staged event, and also that we were able to have Diane Sayre with us today, joining us from the Manhattan area. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you send out this video as well. This was a very comprehensive and excellent statement on the events of a week ago, and we'll be seeing more of you here at LaRouchePAC.com.